There is a hallway in a rented farmhouse 2 miles east of Cedar Bluff, Kansas, where for 9 months a paper chain hung down the wall beside the light switch, and every single evening it got a little shorter. 274 links when it went up. Construction paper in whatever colors the drugstore had left over after Christmas, red and green and a strange industrial blue, cut into strips on the kitchen table and looped together with a glue stick by a 6-year-old boy who took the job more seriously than anything he had ever been given. Nobody in that house called it a countdown. A countdown is what you do to a rocket. They called it the chain, the way you'd say the porch or the truck. And in the evenings, after teeth and before the light went off, somebody tore the bottom link away and dropped it in a shoebox under the bench by the door. Tonight's story is that chain. It's also about a diner booth that stayed empty on purpose, a lawn that kept getting mowed by a man who never once mentioned it, and a jersey with a number on it that nobody else was allowed to wear. There's no villain in this one. I want to say that up front so you can let your shoulders come away from your ears and stop waiting for a shoe to drop. Nobody in this story is cruel. Some of them are worn down to the thread. One of them is 11 years old and furious for a while, which is a different thing entirely, and one of them is far away doing paperwork in a hot metal building and pretending on camera that she isn't lonely. So let the lamp go low. Let your breathing find its own slow pace. Stay with it to the end if you can, because the last link comes off that chain in a school gym in front of the whole town. And then there's one more part after that, 2 years later, about a small brass plate and a screwdriver. That's the part I'd stay awake for if I were you. If you drift off before then, though, that's all right. The story will keep. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and she was 34 years old the fall the orders came. In Cedar Bluff, she was the woman behind the counter at the drugstore on Main, the one who knew your dog's name and which of your prescriptions you were quietly rationing. She'd been a pharmacy technician there for 9 years. She had a way of leaning on the counter with both forearms when somebody's news was bad, and a habit of writing the instructions bigger than the label required in her own handwriting for the customers she knew had trouble reading small print. Old Mr. Lindstrom called her the only honest person in the county, which wasn't fair to anyone else, but he meant it warmly. 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks every summer, she was Sergeant Whitfield instead. She'd signed up at 19 because the Army Reserve paid for the classes she couldn't, and then somewhere in the second enlistment it stopped being about tuition and became about the people. Her unit was a transportation company out of Salina, an hour and a half up the highway, and their whole reason for existing was to move freight and to keep trucks alive. Not glamorous. She was fine with that. Her job, as she explained it to her son once, was making sure the right things ended up in the right place, which is more or less what she did behind the pharmacy counter, too. Her husband was Wes, 36, and he worked the scale house and the shop at the grain co-op on the north edge of town. He was quiet in the way that some men are quiet, not sullen but economical, and he kept lists on the backs of feed receipts, in pencil, in tiny block capitals. If you'd asked Wes to describe his own marriage, he'd have taken so long to answer that you'd have assumed he had nothing to say. What he would have gotten to, eventually, is that his wife walked into a room and the room got easier, and that he'd never once figured out how she did it. They had 2 kids. Maddie was 11, all elbows and opinions, a 6th grader in the exact season of life where a person starts keeping a private ledger of everything the adults get wrong. Her birthday fell in November, which meant she was going to be 11 for every single day her mother was gone, a fact she brought up more than once. She played volleyball for the school in a jersey with the number 12 on the back, and she wore it under her coat on game days like a secret. Cole was 6, in kindergarten, and Cole counted things. Steps to the mailbox, Cheerios in the bowl, cars that passed the house between the end of the show and the start of dinner. Nobody taught him that. He came out of the factory that way. Cedar Bluff itself is a town of a little under 2,000 people, laid out flat under a sky that doesn't bother pretending to have edges. There's a grain elevator you can see from 6 miles out, which is how you know you're nearly home. There's a school that holds all 13 grades under one long roof, and a gym that doubles as the auditorium, the storm shelter, the wedding reception hall, and, on certain nights, the church of the entire county. There's a diner on Main called the Bluebird, run for 31 years by a woman named Arlene, who is somewhere in her late 60s and who will tell you her age herself before you can wonder about it. And across the road from the Whitfield place, there was Bud Halloran, 79 years old, a Vietnam veteran with a bad shoulder, a good mower, and an opinion about everything that he mostly kept behind his teeth. The orders came in the fall, and they came the way those things actually come, which is to say slowly and then all at once. First, there was a rumor at drill, the kind that circulates for months and usually amounts to nothing. Then in September, there was a warning order, which is the Army's way of saying, we're probably going to ask you for most of a year of your life. Please make arrangements. We'll confirm later. Then in November, the paper landed for real. Report to the Armory on a Sunday in the middle of January. 3 weeks at a mobilization station down in Texas, then a flight, then 8 months on a base in Kuwait running a truck yard, then demobilization, then whatever the coming home turned out to look like. 9 months, door to door, 274 days, if you were the kind of man who wanted the exact number, and Wes was exactly that kind of man. Dana read it twice at the kitchen table with her coat still on. Then she folded it, set it under the sugar bowl, and started a list on the back of an envelope, because that is what she did with feelings. Wes, when she told him, said, "Okay." Then he sat down. Then he said it again. "Okay." That was the whole conversation, and it wasn't coldness. It was two people who understood that the crying part could wait until the logistics part was done, and that if they did the logistics part well enough, there'd be less crying later. They were wrong about that, of course, but it was a decent theory. The paperwork season lasted 3 weeks, and it was, in its own dull way, the hardest part. A power of attorney so Wes could sign the things she usually signed. A care plan naming who takes the kids if something happens to Wes too, which is a form nobody should have to fill out in their own kitchen with a pencil. Updated beneficiary pages. The family health coverage switching over to the military plan, which meant new cards, new rules, a new pharmacy network. All of it explained to her by a woman on the phone who was very kind and very far away. Wes made a binder. He labeled it with a marker, House. Then, on a second binder, because he is who he is, School. Dale Hollis, who owns the drugstore and has owned it since before Dana was born, took the news standing up with his glasses pushed onto his forehead. The law was on her side for the job, and both of them knew it. A reservist called up gets her civilian work back, and Dale wouldn't have needed the law anyway. What he said was, "Your spot's here. Not your job. Your spot." Dana thought about that phrase for the next 9 months, at odd hours, in a country where the wind came off the sand instead of the wheat. The last Saturday, they made the chain. It was Cole's idea, or half his idea. He'd seen one in a classroom for counting down to Christmas, and he wanted one for counting down to Mom. Dana sat with him on the kitchen floor with the good scissors and the drugstore construction paper, and Wes worked out the actual number of days on the back of a receipt 3 times, because he wanted it exactly right, and because it gave him something to do with his hands. 274. Cole insisted on making every single loop himself. It took him 2 hours and 11 minutes, and he announced the total when he was done. Maddie came in around loop 100 and something, hovered in the doorway with her arms crossed, said the whole thing was babyish, and then sat down on the floor and wrote on 11 of the links in tiny handwriting before glue-sticking them shut so nobody could read them. She wouldn't say what they said. She wouldn't say for a long time. They hung it in the hallway by the light switch, where it was impossible to walk past without touching. That was on purpose. Dana had learned from an older sergeant that the trick with a long separation isn't hiding it from kids, it's giving them something to do with it. Hands solve what words can't. The next morning she left. The goodbye happened twice, which is how it usually goes. Once at the house, in the gravel, in the gray light, with Cole in his pajama pants and rubber boots, and Maddie standing back on the porch step with her jaw set like a woman of 40. Then again 2 hours later at the Armory in Salina, in a parking lot full of duffel bags and identical haircuts and grandparents holding babies up like offerings, where the goodbye had to be quick because 130 some other families were doing the same thing on the same asphalt, and there were only so many minutes before the buses. Dana knelt down and told Cole the thing she'd rehearsed. "You're in charge of the chain. That's a real job. Don't let anybody else do it." He nodded so hard his whole body went with it. To Maddie she said less, because Maddie had gone somewhere behind her own face and wasn't taking visitors. Dana put a hand on the back of her daughter's neck, the way you do with a cat that might bolt, and said, "I know," which was the only honest thing available. Maddie didn't answer. 9 months later, Dana would find out what those 11 glued-shut links said, and she'd understand what her daughter had been holding in that parking lot, and it would knock the wind out of her worse than anything that happened overseas. Then the buses. Then the flag on the armory pole snapping in that particular Kansas wind that comes from nowhere and means nothing. Then a drive home with the radio off, an hour and a half of highway, a boy asleep in the back seat with his cheek against the window, and a girl in the front seat who did not once look over at her father. That night, they tore off the first link. Cole did it standing on the bench so he could reach the bottom, and he did it with tremendous ceremony, and then he wanted to know whether they were allowed to tear off too. Wes said no. Cole asked why. Wes said because a day is a day, and you can't hurry one by wanting to, which is the truest thing anybody said in that house all year. The shoebox went under the bench, the hall light went off, and the first of 274 evenings folded itself up and went away. Here is a thing nobody tells you about a deployment, and it's the reason this story is worth an hour of your evening. The person who leaves gets a mission. Wake up, eat, work, sleep, repeat, with the whole shape of the day handed to her by somebody else. It's hard, and it's lonely, and it is at least legible. The people who stay get something much stranger. They get their ordinary life, exactly as it was, with one load-bearing wall removed, and they have to keep living in it anyway. School still starts at 8. The furnace still quits on the coldest night. The dog still needs her shots. Nobody hands you a shape for that. You build it out of whatever's lying around, and if you're lucky, the people around you start quietly handing you pieces. That's what happened in Cedar Bluff. It happened so gradually that it took the Whitfields most of a year to notice they were being carried. The lawn was first. The first Thursday in April, the week the grass finally came in, Wes came home from the co-op at 6:30, and the yard was cut. Not roughly, cut properly, in overlapping passes, the trim done along the foundation and around the propane tank, the clippings blown off the walk. He stood in the driveway with the truck door open and looked at it for a while, the way a man looks at a math problem. He knew whose mower. Bud Halloran, across the road, had a green riding mower older than Maddie that he kept running on stubbornness and carburetor cleaner. So the next evening, Wes walked across and knocked and said thank you and offered gas money. Bud, from behind the screen door, said, "For what?" Wes said, "For the yard." Bud said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then he asked whether the boy liked green beans, because he had put in too many and they were going to go to waste, and would Wes take a sack? That was the whole negotiation. The lawn stayed mowed all the way from April to the frost. It got mowed the week Wes had the flu so bad he couldn't stand up straight. And it got mowed the week of the county fair when nobody in that town did anything they were supposed to. And it got mowed the last time in October, high and neat, 2 days before Dana came home, which was not an accident, and everybody involved knew it. Not once in all that time did Bud Halloran admit to mowing anything. Wes learned to say thank you a different way. He'd changed the oil in Bud's truck and refused to talk about it. Twice in February, he cleared Bud's drive with the tractor before dawn and was gone before the old man's kitchen light came on. 2 men in their 70s and 30s, respectively, conducting an entire friendship without ever once acknowledging out loud that either of them was doing anything at all. If you've lived in a small town, you know exactly the sound that friendship makes, which is no sound whatsoever. The booth was second, and the booth was Arlene. The Bluebird has 11 booths and a counter with 7 stools, and the third booth from the door, on the window side, is where Dana had sat every Wednesday morning on her day off for going on 9 years, with a coffee and a short stack and whatever paperback she was 2/3 through. It's a corner booth. It gets the good light at 9 in the morning. It is, by any reasonable measure, the best seat in the house. The Wednesday after Dana shipped out, Arlene came in early, and she took a piece of cardstock and a marker, and she wrote on it in her round, ferocious handwriting, "Reserved," and under that, "Whitfield," and under that, "Back in October." She propped it against the salt shaker, and that was that. For 39 consecutive Wednesdays, on the busiest morning of the week, in a diner with a line out the door on cattle sale days, that booth sat empty from open until close. People asked. Of course they asked. Truckers who didn't know, and a state highway crew who worked the county road all June, and one memorable Wednesday, a family of 6 from out of state on their way to Colorado who very reasonably wanted to know why they were standing there when a 4-seater was plainly available. What Arlene said, every single time, in the same flat, cheerful voice. "That one's spoken for. Coffee's on the house while you wait." She lost money on it. Not a fortune, a few dollars every Wednesday for 39 weeks, plus all that free coffee, which in a business with margins like a diner's is not nothing. If you'd suggested to her that she was doing something noble, she would have laughed at you and then said something withering about your shirt. Arlene's actual explanation, given exactly once to her cook at 5:30 in the morning, was this. "Girl's coming back. Where's she going to sit?" The jersey was third, and the jersey was complicated because the jersey involved Maddie, and Maddie was not doing well. Here is what nobody in that house understood until much later. Maddie was 11, and 11 is the age where you finally, fully comprehend what a risk is. Cole didn't. Cole thought his mother was somewhere hot and far away doing paperwork, which happened to be exactly true. Maddie had a phone and a search engine and the fatal ability to read a news article about a country and a region on a map and then lie awake building a bridge between that article and her own hallway. So Maddie got angry, because anger is what fear turns into when it has nowhere else to go and no vocabulary. She was angry at her father for being the one who was there. She was angry at her mother for going, which she knew was unfair, and being 11, she couldn't hold the unfairness and the anger at the same time, so she just carried both and let them grind against each other. She was angry at the chain in the hallway, which she said out loud was stupid, and which she also stopped and looked at every night before bed, a fact her father noticed from the kitchen doorway and had the sense never to mention. And she quit volleyball. Not dramatically, she simply didn't show up to the first practice in August, and when Wes asked, she said she wasn't doing it this year, and when he asked why, she said because she didn't feel like it, in the tone that closes a door. Wes, who had never in his life pushed a child into anything, said okay. Then he sat in the truck outside the co-op for 20 minutes that afternoon with his hands on the wheel, feeling like a man watching a slow leak he had no idea how to find. Her coach was Kelsey Rios, 29, who taught 6th grade science and coached the middle school team, and who had had Maddie in class the spring her mother shipped out. Coach Rios knew about the deployment. In a school of that size, everybody knew everything, which is a curse most days and a mercy on the others. She didn't call the house. She didn't send a note home. What she did was hand out jerseys at the second practice, and when she got to the 12s, she held it up and said, out loud, to 14 girls in a gym that smelled like floor wax and rubber, "12's out this season. It's Whitfield's." One of the 8th graders asked if she could have it, since it wasn't being used. Coach Rios said no. Then she folded the jersey and put it on the shelf in her office, where it sat, in full view, through every practice and every home game for the rest of the fall. Nobody told Maddie. That was the part that mattered. It wasn't a trick to lure her back, and it wasn't a lesson delivered with a wink. Coach Rios just kept a seat warm the way Arlene kept a booth warm, and the way Bud kept a lawn cut, on the theory that you don't get to decide when a person is ready to come back, but you do get to make absolutely sure there's something to come back to. It took Maddie 6 weeks to find out about it. When she did, she came home and went straight to her room and shut the door and cried the way a person cries when they've been braced for a very long time and something finally gives. But we're getting ahead. Let's go where Dana was, because I've left her out on purpose, and there's a reason for that. The base was flat and beige and enormous, and the sound of it never entirely stopped. Generators, mostly. A low, constant hum under everything, the kind you stop hearing in about 4 days, and then hear again every time it cuts out. Her building was a metal structure with an air conditioner bolted through one wall that worked hard and won by a narrow margin. Her cot was in a room she shared with 3 other women, separated by wall lockers and a hanging sheet, and in 9 months she never once had the room to herself. Her actual job was the truck yard, keeping track of 80-some vehicles, what was up, what was down, what was waiting on a part from halfway around the world, and getting the right convoy loaded and out the gate on time. She was good at it. Better than she'd expected, honestly. There is a particular kind of person who finds a strange peace in making a complicated system behave, and it turns out that person is the same person who alphabetizes a pharmacy shelf. The days were long and mostly identical. That was the thing she hadn't braced for. Not danger, sameness. Wake before light, chow, yard. Heat that arrived like a hand on the back of your neck by 8 in the morning. Paperwork, more yard, chow. An hour in a plywood gym. Then the part of the day she actually lived for, which happened in a plastic chair in the corner of the recreation building where the internet was least bad. Kansas is 9 hours behind Kuwait. 9 hours is a cruel number. It meant her evening was their morning chaos, and their bedtime was her 3 or 4 in the morning. So they built a system, because that's what her family did with feelings. Twice a week, she got up at 3 in the morning her time to make bedtime in theirs. Wes set the laptop on the kitchen table, propped against the sugar bowl, and Dana watched her children brush their teeth from 6,000 miles away. That's what she was. For 9 months, in that house, Dana Whitfield was a voice on a laptop at bedtime, a rectangle of light on the wall by the hallway where the chain hung. You can make more out of that than you'd think. She read to Cole. That was their thing. Chapter books, 10 minutes a night, and she got very good at reading upside down through a camera that lagged half a second behind her mouth. He'd hold the book up to the screen so she could see the pictures, which meant she saw nothing but a blur of paper, and she'd say, "Oh, wow," anyway, and he'd be satisfied. Some nights, the connection was bad, and she'd read the same sentence 4 times. Some nights it dropped entirely, and she'd sit in a plastic chair at 3:15 in the morning under a fluorescent light in a building full of other people's murmured phone calls, and she'd put her hand flat on the table and breathe until she could do the next thing. She asked about the chain every time, always the same question, "How's it looking?" And Cole would run, actually run, down the hall to count, and come back and report the number, and she'd say, "That's fewer than last time." And he'd agree that it was, gravely, as though the 2 of them had audited it together. With Maddie, it was harder. Maddie came to the laptop. She always came, but she'd sit at an angle with her knees up, and she'd give her mother the news of her life in the smallest units the English language allows. Fine. Good. Nothing. Some nights she'd get up and leave in the middle, and Wes would say she had homework, and Dana would say, "Sure," in a voice that fooled nobody, and then she'd go back to her room and lie on a cot in the dark with a hand over her eyes. She talked to Wes about it exactly once, in June, at 3 in the morning her time, after the kids had gone to bed and it was just the 2 of them and the sugar bowl. "She hates me," Dana said. Wes took his time, which she'd learned to wait for. "She's got your face on," he said. "The one you get when you're scared and you decide you're going to be fine about it. She's got it on all the way, and she can't get it off, and she's 11. so she doesn't know that's what it is. Dana didn't say anything for a while. I don't have a face, she said. You've got a face, Wes said. There was a long pause on a bad connection. Okay, she said. Now here's the part of the year where the story turns, and it turns in a place nobody was watching, on a Wednesday morning in July, in the third booth from the door at the Bluebird Diner. Wes had never sat in it, not once. 9 years of that being his wife's booth, and he'd have felt like a man wearing another man's coat. But that Wednesday he came in for a coffee at 7:30 in the morning before work, on the worst week of the year, and Arlene looked at him. The week had earned the title. The furnace people had come and told him the heat exchanger was cracked and the whole unit needed replacing before winter, which was $4,100 he did not have loose. The truck's rear brakes had started grinding. Cole had woken up screaming 2 nights in a row over something he couldn't explain in the morning, and the day before, Wes had gone to the school for the parent conference he'd been dreading, where he learned that his daughter, an A and B student her whole life, had turned in nothing at all for 3 weeks in a summer enrichment class, and had told her teacher, when asked, that it didn't matter. He'd handled it wrong. He knew that even while he was doing it. He'd gotten quiet, and then he'd gotten short with her in the truck, and he'd said, "Your mother's doing a lot harder things than a worksheet," which was true, and was also the single least useful sentence available to him in the whole language. Maddie had looked out the window and said, "Yeah, well." She left. And Wes, who had never once raised his voice at his children, had pulled the truck over on the shoulder of a county road and put both hands on the top of the wheel and been unable to speak at all. So he came into the Bluebird at 7:30 in the morning with all of that in him, and Arlene took one look at him from behind the register and said, "Sit down." He said, "I'll take it to go." She said, "Sit down, Wesley." He looked around for somewhere to sit, and Arlene, without any ceremony at all, plucked the reserved card off the table in the third booth and set it face down on the counter and pointed. He said, "That's Dana's." "You're Dana's," Arlene said. "Sit." So he sat in his wife's booth in the good light at 7:30 in the morning, and Arlene brought him coffee and a short stack he hadn't ordered, and she sat down across from him, which in 31 years of running that diner she had done for maybe 6 people. And Wes Whitfield, who kept lists in pencil on the backs of feed receipts, told a 68-year-old woman with flour on her forearms that he was drowning. That he could do the school and the co-op and the furnace, or he could do the kids, but he couldn't do both, and that he'd been counting on being able to do both, and that he was starting to understand he'd never actually been able to do both, and that what he was really terrified of was that his wife was going to come home in October and find her family in worse shape than she'd left it, and know it was him. Arlene listened to all of it. Then she said the thing that turned this story. "You know what your problem is," she said. "Everybody in this town is waiting for you to ask, and you'd rather die." Wes said he didn't want to be a charity case. Arlene said, and I want to get this right, because half of Cedar Bluff can quote it now, "Nobody's giving you anything, hun. We're holding your spot. That's different. A gift you have to pay back. A spot you just have to come stand in." Then she got up, took the coffee pot around the room, and by 9 o'clock that morning, in the way of small towns everywhere, the entire county knew that Wes Whitfield had cracked in the third booth and needed help and would never once ask for it. What happened next did not look like a telethon. It was a series of small, deniable events arranged so that a proud man could accept help without having to call it help. Dale Hollis found a furnace installer who would work for parts. A woman from church found Cole a place in the summer youth program and a van that could pick him up. In August, Kelsey Rios put a jersey on a shelf and told an 8th grader no. And in September, the thing happened that broke Maddie open. It was a Tuesday, and Wes had a load count that ran late, and he'd texted Maddie that he'd be an hour behind, and she'd said fine. She was walking home from school on the shoulder of the county road, which everybody did, when Bud Halloran's truck slowed alongside her. Now, Maddie had known Bud her whole life as the old man across the road who did not talk. He'd fixed her bike chain once when she was 7, without a single word, and handed it back and gone inside. He rolled the window down and said, "Ride?" She got in. The cab smelled like sawdust and old coffee. They drove about a mile and a half in complete silence, and then, without any preamble, without looking away from the road, Bud Halloran said this: "I was 19, overseas, 13 months. My mother wrote me every week and never once told me my father was sick. Died 2 months before I got home. She thought she was protecting me." Maddie didn't say anything. "Wasn't protection," Bud said. "It was just further away." They drove another quarter mile. "You're mad at her," he said. Maddie said, very fast, "I'm not." "All right," Bud said. Then, after a while, "I was mad at mine for 11 years. Got over it about a month after she died. Wouldn't recommend the schedule." He pulled into the Whitfield Drive and stopped and did not turn to look at her, because he understood a great deal about the mechanics of dignity. "Your mother's got the easy job," he said. "She's got somebody telling her what to do all day. You're the one holding a whole house up with nobody thanking you for it, and you're 11 and you're doing it. That's the harder job. I want you to know somebody noticed." Maddie sat in that truck for a second, and then she got out and went inside and did not cry until she'd shut her bedroom door. 2 days later, she found out about the jersey. One of the 8th graders told her, in the hallway, in the offhand way of teenagers, that Coach Rios wouldn't let anybody have 12 because it was being saved, and had been since August. Maddie went to the gym after school and stood in the doorway of the little office and said, "Is that true?" Coach Rios said it was. Maddie said, "Season's basically half over." Coach Rios said, "It's your jersey, whether you play in it or not. That's not the same question as whether you want to play. Do you want to play?" Maddie said yes. That's the whole conversation. There was no speech. She practiced Thursday, and she was rusty and furious about being rusty, and she played 11 minutes in the away game that Saturday and served 4 times and got 2 of them in. Here's the part she did alone. She started keeping a notebook, not a diary, a stat book. Every game the rest of that fall, her serves, her points, her errors, in tiny block capitals, in pencil, in a system she invented herself and never explained to anybody, because she was, in the way of daughters everywhere, her father's child down to the marrow. On the inside cover she wrote a title, and the title was, "For Mom, Season Record," and she never showed it to a single living soul. She ruled out 9 rows on the first page, because 9 was how many games were left, and she filled in 8 of them and left the 9th one blank on purpose. She also started tearing off the chain link some nights. Cole let her. That was a negotiation between 2 children that no adult was ever informed of, and it was, if you think about it, the most generous thing a 6-year-old boy did all year. Autumn came in the way it does out there, all at once, a Tuesday in the low 90s and a Thursday where you can see your breath. The chain got short enough that it stopped being a chain and became a fringe. At 40 links, Wes started sleeping badly, which surprised him. At 30, the school found out the date. And this is where I need to tell you about the gym, and about a phone tree, and about a woman named Arlene who had been thinking about this since the week she put a card on a table in January. Because the thing about a homecoming is that the family knows the date and the town does not. And the family, in this case, had decided very firmly on a quiet one. Wes had thought it through, and he was certain. He'd read the family readiness materials, he'd talked to another spouse from the unit, and everything told him the same thing. Keep the first day small. She'll be exhausted. She'll have been awake for a day and a half. She won't want a crowd. So the plan was this. Wes drives to the armory in Salina alone, because the release ceremony there is chaos, and Cole doesn't do well with chaos. He brings her home. The kids are at the house. They have a quiet supper. That's it. That's the whole plan, and it was a good plan, and it was the right plan, and it had one flaw in it, which was that Wes Whitfield had spent 9 months learning something about his town and had not yet finished learning it. Arlene called him at the co-op 11 days out. "What time Saturday?" she said. Not asked, said. Wes said, "Who told you it was Saturday?" Arlene said, "Wesley." He explained the plan, the quiet supper, the exhaustion. He explained it well, and Arlene listened to the whole thing, and then she said, "That's fine. Bring her by the gym at 2. Wes said, "For what?" And Arlene said, "Maddie's got a game at 2." Which was true. It was the last home game of the middle school season, a Saturday afternoon match against a school 40 miles east, the kind of game that ordinarily draws about 60 people, most of them related to somebody on the floor. Wes thought about it for a long moment on the co-op phone with a load ticket in his hand. Then he said, 2 o'clock. He didn't tell his daughter. He didn't tell anybody. And he spent the next 11 days quietly certain he'd made a mistake. The demobilization took 9 days back at the post in Texas, which is a stretch of time that no soldier has ever once described as brief. Medical screening, dental, hearing tests, paperwork, and briefings on reintegration, delivered in a cold auditorium by people who genuinely meant well. Somewhere in there was a slide about how coming home is not the end of the deployment, but the beginning of a different phase, and Dana wrote it down. Later, she'd be glad she had. Then, on the last Saturday in October, flights and buses finally brought the unit back to its armory in Salina, and Wes Whitfield stood in a crowd of 130 families in the same parking lot where he had said goodbye 9 months before. He was holding nothing because he hadn't been able to think of a single thing to bring that wouldn't be stupid. The release formation lasted 11 minutes. There was a speech. Nobody who has ever attended one of these has retained a word of any of them, including the people giving them. There was a command, and 130-some soldiers came out of formation into a crowd all at once, and the sound in that lot went up like weather. She found him first. She always did. They didn't say anything useful for a while. Wes had rehearsed something in the truck, and it went straight out of his head, which was a mercy for everyone. What he actually said, eventually, into her hair, was, "You smell like a bus." And Dana said, "You have no idea." She was thinner. That was the first thing. And her hands were different, calloused across the palms in a way they'd never been at the pharmacy. She talked the whole first 20 minutes of the drive, and then stopped talking entirely, all at once, like a radio losing a station, and stared out at the wheat stubble going by. Wes led her. 9 months had taught him a great deal about the uses of not talking. Around Ellsworth, she said, "Everything's so green." Wes said it wasn't, particularly. It was October. "It is," she said. "You don't know." 20 miles out from home, he told her. He said it straight, because he had no talent for anything else. He said, "I need to stop at the school before the house. Maddie's got a game, and I think there might be some people there." Dana turned and looked at him. "How many people?" she said. Wes said, "I honestly don't know." She looked down at herself. 9 days of demobilization, 30 hours of travel before that, a uniform she'd been in since a bathroom in a terminal somewhere, hair scraped back, no sleep worth the name since Thursday. "I look like something out of a hamper," she said. "Yeah," Wes said. "Okay," Dana said, and put her head back against the seat, and about 4 miles later, without opening her eyes, "Is she playing? Actually playing?" "Number 12, Wes said. And his wife made a sound he'd never heard her make in 14 years. One short breath through her teeth, and put the back of her hand over her mouth, and kept it there most of the way to the county line. Here is what was happening in the gym at Cedar Bluff Junior-Senior High School at 1:50 in the afternoon on that Saturday in October. It was full. Not 60 people. Full. Both sides. The pull-out bleachers all the way to the top on the home side and most of the way up on the visitors' side, which had never in living memory happened for a middle school volleyball game. The visiting team's parents, who had driven 40 miles for a Saturday match, walked in and stopped dead, and one of them said, out loud, "Is this the wrong gym?" Arlene had closed the Bluebird on a Saturday. She had put a card in the window in her round, ferocious handwriting, "Closed till 4, holding a spot." There were 4 crock pots on a folding table by the concession stand, and nobody had organized that either. Dale Hollis had closed the drugstore, which he had not done for anything except his own wife's funeral. The signs were the part nobody planned and everybody brought. Poster board and butcher paper and one bedsheet with the letters painted about a foot high, and a lot of them were misspelled, and 2 of them said the same thing in different handwriting, and one, held by a 5-year-old who could not read it, said, "Welcome home, Mom," and she was not that woman's daughter. Bud Halloran was at the top of the home bleachers in a clean shirt with a crease still in it from the package. He had not been inside that gym in 19 years. And on the floor, warming up in a jersey with a number 12 on the back, Dana Whitfield had no idea about any of it. She thought the crowd was because it was the last home game. She thought people had come because of the crock pots. She was 11 years old, and she was mid-serve in the warm-up line when the doors at the far end of the gym opened. Nobody yelled. That's the part everyone remembers, and I've heard it described by 4 different people the same way. There was no roar. The whole gym did the opposite of a roar. 600 people in a small-town gym went absolutely, completely quiet, all at once, the way a field goes quiet before hail, and the referee's whistle stopped halfway to his mouth. Because Dana had stopped in the doorway, and in the middle of that silence, one very small voice from the front row of the home bleachers said, "Mom." Cole came off those bleachers like something launched. He hit her at a dead run about 8 feet inside the door, and she went down on one knee to take him, and that's when the sound finally came, and it came from everywhere, and it went on for a long time. Maddie did not run. Maddie stood at the service line with a volleyball on her hip and did not move. And this is where I want you to be patient with her, because she was 11, and she had been holding her face on for 274 days, and she genuinely did not know how to take it off in front of the entire county. She stood there for about 4 seconds. Then she dropped the ball, and it bounced away across the floor, and she walked. Not ran. She walked the length of that gym in her knee pads, with her chin up and her eyes streaming, in a jersey somebody had put on a shelf and refused to give away. And when she got to her mother, she didn't say anything at all. She just put her forehead down on Dana's shoulder, where the flag patch was, and stayed there. And in that quiet, Cole Whitfield, 6 years old, remembered his job. He'd carried it in his fist the whole time, gone soft and damp from being held. One link of construction paper, industrial blue, the last one, cut off the wall that morning and not yet torn, because he had decided, sometime back in August, entirely on his own, without telling a soul, that his mother should be the one to do it. He held it up. Dana looked at it for a second. Then she got her thumbs into the loop, and she pulled it apart at center court in front of the whole town, and the paper made a small sound that not one person more than 4 feet away could possibly have heard. They still talk about it. 274 days, and the loudest thing in that gym was 600 people trying to be quiet enough to hear a piece of paper tear. They played the game. That's the part I love. They actually played the game, 45 minutes late, and Cedar Bluff lost in 2 sets, and nobody has ever cared less about a scoreboard. Dana watched it from the bleachers with a boy asleep against her ribs by the second set, still in a uniform she'd been wearing for 2 days, with Bud Halloran 2 rows up behind her, not saying one single word. Maddie served 9 times and got 7 in. The quiet supper happened after all, 4 hours late. Grilled cheese, because that's what Cole voted for, and nobody had the strength to campaign against him. Dana fell asleep at the table for about 90 seconds, sitting up mid-sentence, and woke up and finished the sentence. And then, at 9 o'clock that night, when the boy was down and the house had gone still and the hallway wall was bare for the first time since January, Maddie came into the kitchen and put an envelope on the table. It was a school envelope, soft at the corners from 9 months in a dresser drawer. Inside were 11 links of construction paper, all of them torn open, all of them flattened out, all of them written on in tiny block capitals in pencil. Each one had a small number in the corner, 1 through 11, because Maddie Whitfield was her father's daughter, and she had numbered them in April so that whoever read them someday would read them in the right order. Dana had forgotten. In that January parking lot, there'd been 130 families and a bus, and she had forgotten entirely that her daughter had sat on the kitchen floor and written on 11 links and glued them shut so nobody could read them. She read them at the kitchen table with her husband standing behind her chair. The first link said, "I am not going to be good at this." The second said, "I looked up how many people come back, and I wish I hadn't." The third said, "Dad tries too hard, and it makes it worse, and I know that's not fair." The fourth said, "When you call, I want to talk, and then I can't." The fifth said, "Cole doesn't understand, and I'm glad." The sixth said, "I told everyone I quit volleyball because I was bored." The seventh said, "That was a lie." The eighth said, "I don't want anyone being nice to me about it." The ninth said, "Number 12 is going to be on a shelf, and I'm going to look at it every day." The 10th said, "I've been getting up and looking at the chain after Dad goes to bed." And the 11th one said this, "I'm going to be mean to you on the computer for 9 months, and then I'm going to be sorry. I'm sorry now, in January, so it counts either way." Dana Whitfield made it through the first 10. She did not make it through the 11th. She got up from the chair and crossed the kitchen and got hold of her daughter, and Maddie let her. The two of them stood beside the refrigerator for a while, with Wes in the doorway looking at the floor. What Dana finally said, when she could, was not absolution, and it wasn't a speech. "You want to know the worst part of my whole 9 months? Nobody let me be bad at it either." Maddie laughed, wet and awful and surprised, but it was a laugh. Dana touched her hair and said, "You were mean to me on a computer, and I said I was fine 400 times. We're both liars. Let's knock it off." Then Maddie went and got a spiral notebook out of her backpack and put it on the table and walked out of the room fast, the way you do when you've handed somebody something and cannot be present for them opening it. On the inside cover, in pencil, in block capitals, "For Mom, season record. 9 ruled rows. Serves, points, errors, in a system nobody had taught her, in her own invented shorthand, kept faithfully by an 11-year-old for a woman 6,000 miles away who never knew the book existed." Dana sat at her kitchen table at 9:40 at night on the day she came home and read the statistics of 8 middle school volleyball games she had missed, one by one, in order. The 9th row was empty. It had been ruled out and left blank since September, and Dana looked at it for a while before she understood, and then she got a pencil out of the drawer and filled it in herself, from memory, from the bleachers. 9 serves, 7 in. Now. The rest of it, the true rest of it, is less cinematic, and I'd be lying to you if I stopped at the gym. Coming home was harder than anybody in that house expected, and it was harder in a way none of them had thought to brace for, because they'd all braced for the wrong thing. The first 2 weeks were a honeymoon. Everybody says that. Then, around the 3rd week, Dana started noticing how loud her own house was. The dishwasher. Cole's cartoons. The particular pitch of children who have missed you and are now going to be near you at all times. She'd been living in a room where the only sound was a generator and 3 other women breathing, and had learned to want that. And here was a home with 2 children in it who wanted every single hour she had. And some evenings she went and stood in the garage for 10 minutes and then came back in and hated herself for it. And Wes, who had run that house alone for 9 months, had systems. His systems were, frankly, worse than hers. His grocery list made no sense. He'd let Cole's bedtime drift to 9:30. He'd invented a laundry method that Dana could not look directly at. And every time she fixed one of his systems, she watched something go out behind his eyes, because he had held that house up for 274 days on nothing but stubbornness and lists in pencil. And now the person he'd done it for was correcting his work. They had 2 bad fights in November. One was about the grocery list and was not about the grocery list. The other happened on a Thursday night. And it was Dana saying the thing she'd sworn she wouldn't, which was, "You have no idea what it's like." And Wes standing in the kitchen with a dish towel in his hand, saying quietly, "No, I don't. And you have no idea what it's like here." So that's two of us. And then walking out to the garage, which was, until that moment, her spot. They fixed it the way people who intend to stay married fix things, which is slowly and unglamorously and with help. In December, they drove up to a family counselor in Hayes every other Thursday for 4 months, which Wes told exactly no one about, and which turned out to be the single best 4,000 miles that truck ever put on. And Dana went back to the drugstore in the middle of November, to her spot, which was still there, and put on the smock and stood behind the counter and found, to her enormous relief, that her hands knew what to do. Bud Halloran died the following August, at 80, in his own bed, which is more than most people get. He'd made it through one more winter of pretending not to plow the Whitfield Drive, and one more spring of pretending not to mow the yard. And when the will was read, it turned out he'd left the green riding mower to Wes, which everybody found very funny and also could not talk about for about a week. He left his truck to the volunteer fire department, and in a sealed envelope with Maddie's name on it, spelled correctly, he had left $300 and one line on a sheet of ruled paper, in a shaky hand. For the hard job. Somebody noticed. She's 22 now, and she has never spent it. Which brings me to the part I said I'd stay awake for. Here's what happened next. 2 years after that gym, Cedar Bluff Junior Senior High School remodeled the entryway with a bond issue everybody complained about, and in the middle of the remodel, somebody on the school board raised the question of what to do with the trophy case. And Arlene Boyd, 70 years old, 5 feet 1 inch tall, who had never held an elected position in her life and did not attend school board meetings, attended that school board meeting. What she wanted was a bench. Not a plaque, she said, a bench by the gym doors, on the inside, out of the wind, and a small brass plate on it. And the school board, who all ate at the Bluebird and were not fools, approved it in about 90 seconds. The plate says, "Holding a spot." That's the whole inscription. There are no names on it, no dates, no unit, no rank, nobody's photograph, because Arlene was very specific about that and would not be argued with. Her position was that if you put one family's name on it, it becomes about one family. And then, in 19 years, nobody knows who those people were, and it's just furniture. So it says, "Holding a spot." And half the kids who sit on it to change their shoes have no idea what it means. Wes installed it himself on a Saturday, with a socket set and a level, because he would not let the contractor do it. Dana held the plate, Maddie ran the screwdriver, and Cole counted all 8 screws out loud and made everybody wait while he did it. Dana Whitfield is a sergeant first class now, and still in, 1 weekend a month, 26 years total. She'll tell you she stayed in for the retirement, and that's about 40% of the truth. The other 60 is that she came home from a hot, flat country to a gym full of people who had spent 9 months quietly holding a place for her, and she has never entirely gotten over the debt, and she has decided the only sensible way to pay it is to be the person somebody else's spot gets held by. She's a family readiness volunteer for the unit now. When a Kansas family gets a warning order, she is one of the first phone calls. She's made about 40 of those calls. She has a whole speech about paperwork and powers of attorney and care plans, and she gives it well. Then, at the end, every single time, she says the same thing, and it isn't in any manual. Get the whole town in on it. Don't be proud. They're all waiting for you to ask, and you'd rather die. The Bluebird closed in the spring of last year. Arlene turned 78, and her knees turned in their notice, and a hardware franchise looked at the building, and then a young couple from Wichita bought it instead and reopened it in the fall with the same name, the same counter, the same 11 booths, and a coffee price that made the old-timers write letters. The third booth from the door, on the window side, still gets the good light at 9 in the morning. There's a card on the table in it, laminated now, in handwriting that isn't Arlene's, because she wrote out the words on a napkin for the new owners, and they had it copied properly so it would last. It says, "Reserved," and under that it says, "For whoever's coming back." That's the story. The chain came off the wall and into a shoebox, and the shoebox is on a shelf in a closet in a farmhouse 2 miles east of town. 274 links of drugstore construction paper that a 6-year-old boy cut and glued in 2 hours and 11 minutes, and that a family took apart one evening at a time. Cole is a senior this year. He'd like everyone to know he still counts things, that he's aware it's odd, and that he intends to study engineering. Nobody in this story got revenge on anybody. Nobody deserved any. A woman went where she was told and did paperwork in the heat for 9 months, and a man held a house up with lists in pencil, and a girl carried something too heavy for her age and only told the truth about it on 11 pieces of construction paper. And a town, which is only ever a bunch of people who have decided to notice each other, mowed a lawn and saved a booth, and put a jersey on a shelf, and closed a diner on a Saturday. That's not a small thing. Some nights, I think it's the only thing. Sleep well. Let your shoulders come all the way down. Somebody's holding your spot too, and you'd be surprised who, and they'll never once admit it. I'll see you in the next one. If you're still with me, I'd love to hear from you before you drift off. Here's what I keep turning over. Wes was sure the right thing was a quiet homecoming, small and private, and Arlene went around him and filled a gym with 600 people. She was right that day. But she also decided something for a family that wasn't hers to decide. So which would you have wanted if it were you walking through those doors after 274 days? The gym or the porch light and nobody watching? And if you served, or you're the one who stayed home and held the house up, I especially want to hear it. Drop your state and your age while you're down there, because I'm always amazed where you all are listening from. If this one kept you company tonight, a like helps more than you'd think, and to subscribe means the next story finds you.